There was a soft plop in the middle of an empty highway. No honking, no voices. Just the steady patter of rain on a dented car roof and a man kneeling beneath an old SUV, struggling with a deflated tire. It was the kind of sound no one notices. But sometimes it's those forgotten sounds that quietly start stories no one sees coming. His name was Caleb Rourke, and the faded wedding ring that had just slipped from his finger, rolling slowly past a puddle by the roadside, was the last thing he had left from a marriage long gone. He sighed, one hand gripping a wrench, the other shielding his head from the drizzle. His dark hair, messy and soaked, clung to his forehead. The shoulder of his shirt was torn. His shoes were squelching wet. He didn't complain, didn't curse. The man simply worked silently, methodically, as if the sky were raining on everyone except his heart, where the rain had already fallen and there was nothing left to soak. Inside the SUV, a woman sat still, one hand on the steering wheel, eyes following him through the windshield. Her pale blonde hair fell gently over a simple trench coat. She said nothing, but her gaze was not unfamiliar. It was the look of someone who had once lost faith, and now unexpectedly saw it flicker again between puddles and the broken rhythm of the wind. Her name was Elena Maddox. But at that moment, Caleb only knew her as Ellie, a polite, distant stranger caught in an inconvenient rain. He tightened the last lug nut, stood up, and wiped his hands on the frayed legs of his jeans. "All set," he said without looking up. His voice was hoarse, but calm. "You should drive a few more miles before stopping again." She looked up at him, lips parting slightly as if she meant to say something more, but all she said was, "Thank you." He nodded and walked away. No tip, no small talk, no expectations except maybe to get through the afternoon without being ticketed for parking on the shoulder. He didn't know, and maybe didn't dare to dream, that the woman watching him disappear through the mist was actually the secret CEO of one of the region's largest private empires, a woman searching for something money couldn't buy, kindness that didn't need to prove itself. Before we dive in, if you're listening to this while tucked in bed, feel free to like the video and subscribe, only if you truly enjoy what we share here. And if it's late at night, drop a comment to let me know where you're tuning in from and what time it is. Now then, turn off the lights, let the fan hum in the background, and drift with me into tonight's story. The next morning, the sun slipped through the clouds like it was apologizing for the cold, wet night it left behind. Caleb cupped water from a cut-up plastic bottle, splashing his face behind an old gas station. His jacket still hung damp on a metal wire strung between two trees. Nearby, an old pickup truck sat rusting beside the fence. Inside, his daughter, little Maisie, was still asleep, clutching a ragged stuffed bunny missing one ear. Caleb tore open a cold instant noodle pack, half for him, half placed gently on the truck hood for her. No milk, no phone, no complaints. He just looked at his daughter with the kind of quiet that only comes from a man who knows if he falls, there's no one else left to get back up for him. That afternoon, Caleb showed up at the small garage where he picked up occasional work. It wasn't much, just a run-down shop owned by a grumpy old man named Hank, who had a soft spot for people trying. They didn't pay him enough, but they gave him a roof a few hours a day and a reason to keep showing up. As he crouched over an old Ford pickup, changing spark plugs with steady hands, a strange sound broke the hum of the workshop, the sharp click of high heels against rough concrete. Caleb looked up and froze. It was her. Same soft blonde hair, a bit neater this time. White blouse, dark jeans, and those heels too refined for a place smelling of grease and rust. "Fancy seeing you again," she said, a small smile tugging at her lips. Caleb straightened, wrench still in hand. "Car trouble again?" "No, I was just passing by." She looked uncertain, an emotion rare in the women Caleb had met. Ellie, the name she left him yesterday, walked casually around the garage, but not like a customer. She brushed her fingers across an old desk lamp, scanned the tool shelf, then stopped at a child's crayon drawing taped to the wall. A little red-roofed house, a green door, 3 stick figures holding hands. "That's my daughter's." Caleb said, his voice quiet but proud. "She drew the house we never had." Ellie looked at him longer this time. There was no pity in her eyes, just something else, something like memory, or the kind of longing you don't know you've carried until someone else's drawing brings it to the surface. "Did you teach her to draw?" "No, but I taught her to imagine a place that'll be hers someday." Ellie nodded, saying nothing. Caleb bent back down to his wrench, but something shifted inside him. There was a quiet bell ringing in the back of his mind. This woman. She didn't feel like a tourist, didn't talk like the locals, and definitely wasn't the kind of person who'd normally care about a single dad fixing flats and living in a truck. But she was still standing there, and instead of asking, "Why'd you come back?" Caleb just said, "I was about to make coffee." "Want a cup?" Ellie smiled softly. "As long as it's not on the bill. First cup's always free," he said, pausing for just a beat. "For the ones who are grateful." She didn't know those were the exact words his wife once said to him the day he proposed holding a pawnshop ring and 2 homemade cups of iced coffee. The rain from yesterday had cleared, but in Ellie's eyes, something still hadn't fully dried. That coffee was made in a dented aluminum kettle balanced on a half-broken electric burner. No branded paper cups, no organic brown sugar, no heart-shaped milk foam. Just black coffee burnt slightly bitter, poured into 2 chipped ceramic mugs that looked like they'd survived more than one move. And yet, as Caleb placed the cup in Ellie's hands, he felt something he hadn't felt in a long, long time. He was doing something for a woman without it being tied to guilt duty or apology. Ellie sat on an upside-down paint bucket, legs crossed, both hands cupping the mug. The scent of coffee, strong and unapologetic, rose to meet her. She didn't sip right away. Just sat there, eyes gazing out toward the open garage door, where the noontime sun spilled weakly across the cracked cement floor. "How long have you been here?" she asked, her tone gentle, not just polite. Caleb shrugged. "About 2 years. Since the accident." He didn't say more. Ellie didn't ask. People who've lost something rarely need the full story to understand. "And what do you do?" She hesitated. Just a second, but enough for Caleb to notice. "I work in finance," she said, offering a smile that felt like half apology. "So, you count money?" he said with a half smirk. "No, I manage things." She took a sip. "Although lately I feel like I can't manage anything at all." Caleb didn't smile. He nodded. The kind of nod that says, "Yeah, I get that," more than I let on. Sometimes, he said, people don't need someone to fix the whole car. They just need someone to change a tire. Ellie went quiet. That line had hit something she hadn't built defenses for. The burner crackled softly in the silence. A fly buzzed past and vanished behind a dusty, oil-stained curtain. Everything felt raw, but strangely peaceful. Elena Maddox. Yes, that Elena Maddox, who once sat in Davos panels, signed $100 million deals, stood beside ministers and presidents, was now finding comfort in a rusted garage no one could locate on a map. She looked at Caleb, a man with the posture of someone who'd lost everything, yet somehow still carried the one thing money couldn't buy, the ability to be kind without spectacle. After half an hour, Ellie stood up, not in a rush, not out of politeness. She left behind a business card, not the sleek one she used for boardrooms, but a plain one. Ellie M., freelance consultant, a handwritten phone number. "In case my car breaks down again," she said with a smile as thin as mist. Caleb took it, looked at it, then looked at her. "I think your car's fine, but maybe you're the one looking for something that isn't. What kind of something? Something different, from the world you're running from." Ellie didn't answer, but this time, the look she gave him wasn't from someone who needed help. It was from someone wondering if she still had it in her to open the door for something real. When she walked out of that garage, the sun caught her hair just enough to leave a trail of gold behind her. Caleb stepped back in, looked at the card again, and tucked it into his toolbox. He didn't know that in her car, a screen had just gone dark. Subject tracked successfully, no criminal record, no debt, no anomalies. Just a background so clean it's almost suspicious. Elena locked the phone and whispered, "Good." Over the next week, Ellie began showing up like sunlight after rain, unexpected, unannounced, but never late. One day, it was her windshield acting up. Another, she was just passing by, carrying 2 coffees and a bag of sugar-dusted donuts wrapped in wax paper. Caleb didn't ask. He was used to it by now. Used to the fact that the most important things in life often arrive without explanation. But something was shifting. Not in her. In him. "Have you ever thought about leaving this town?" Ellie asked one afternoon as Caleb lay beneath an old sedan, the smell of oil and rust filling the air like even time itself, was starting to corrode. "Never," he said flatly, voice echoing from under the car. "If I left, what would I take with me, Maisie?" He paused. Few people said his daughter's name without stumbling. Fewer still said it like they'd thought about it before. He rolled out from under the car, sweat trickling down his temple. Ellie stood nearby, holding a paper cup of ginger tea. Sunlight slipped through the garage roof, casting a soft halo across her hair, a glow he'd never seen on anyone else. "Are you asking because you actually care?" he said slowly, "or because you want to know whether I'm ambitious?" Ellie smiled, a disarming smile, completely unguarded. "I'm asking because I'm looking for someone who doesn't need ambition to do the right thing." Caleb looked at her longer than usual. What kind of finance job teaches you to ask philosophical questions like that? The kind where the more money people have, the less they're willing to hear the truth. That made Caleb laugh quietly. Then he tilted his head and looked at her, not as someone wary of a stranger, but as someone finally facing a mystery he didn't mind being lost in. The old garage began to feel different since Ellie started coming by. Hank, the garage owner, kept peeking through the window, muttering, "Something weird's going on here." The other mechanics teased Caleb, calling her this week's mystery woman. But Caleb didn't mind. She was different, and he knew that the first moment he saw her eyes. Still, he was different too, not the kind of man a woman like her should be spending time with. That night, back in the truck, Caleb sat quietly beside Maisie, who was already asleep, bundled in a patched blanket, hugging her half-eared bunny. He pulled Ellie's business card from his pocket, letting the flashlight catch the faint ink. No logo, no company email, just a handwritten name and a number. Too clean, too neat, too unreal. Part of him wanted to throw it away, but another part, the part he never let anyone see, tucked it carefully into his shirt pocket, as if it wasn't a card, but a one-way ticket to a place he'd never dared to imagine. Elsewhere in a glass tower overlooking the restless city, Ellie sat alone in a silent conference room, staring at a glowing market report. Her assistant entered quietly. "Ms. Maddox, should I schedule your meeting with the Dubai Investment Board?" She turned off the screen. "No, I'm busy with a special project, something local." "No," she replied, pouring a glass of wine. "Someone without a market." Caleb didn't know that, but he did know. When a woman starts asking strange questions, she's either looking for an excuse to leave or quietly figuring out a reason to stay. And he was starting to hope it was the second one. Saturday morning. The sunlight settled gently over the town like milk clinging to leaves. The small garage still dozed after a night of rain, and Caleb was rummaging through a toolbox when he heard the tiny crunch of gravel behind him. He turned and saw Maisie, hair a tangled mess, plastic sandals, flopping her eyes, still foggy from dreams, trotting over with her threadbare bunny in hand. 3'5", he teased. "Where are you running off to, princess?" "I heard a mouse," she said, serious. As ever, then crouched to inspect a pile of empty cans. "Yeah, I think that was your stomach talking." He pulled a small pack of crackers from his pocket, split it in half, and handed her a piece. Maisie took it, bit into it, and then asked suddenly, "Where's Miss Ellie, Dad?" Caleb paused. "She didn't promise to come, Maisie. She just comes when she can." "Then is she free today?" the girl asked, with such unfiltered honesty that Caleb had to look her in the eyes. Eyes that looked eerily like her mother's, bright, innocent, and still willing to believe in things grown-ups had long stopped hoping for. And then, as if Maisie's question was some kind of ancient spell, the familiar white SUV rolled up, silently. No horn, no fuss. Ellie stepped out. For the first time, not in office wear, but a cozy cream sweater, simple jeans and flat shoes, smudged with tiny marks at the toe. Her hair was tied in a soft bun, and she held a paper bag in one hand, sweet rolls from the famous bakery near the lake. Caleb looked at her and nodded. "Looks like you're free today." "Looks like it." She smiled, then her eyes met Maisie's. And time slowed just half a beat. Maisie didn't run up right away. She stood still for a few seconds, sizing up this visitor with the cautious gaze of a child who's seen too many grown-ups disappear without warning. But then she spotted something sticking out of the bag. A tiny, bear-shaped bun. "For me?" she asked, voice soft as birdsong. "Nope," Ellie replied, grinning. "It's for the dog behind you." Maisie turned. Behind her, the old limping dog, Spanner, was lying quietly on a piece of cardboard, his head resting on a flat tire. She giggled, then stepped forward and took the bun with both hands. Caleb said nothing, just watched. They sat on the worn wooden stoop behind the garage. Caleb wiped off a spot using his shirt. Ellie sat between him and Maisie, sharing sweetbread and ginger tea. Spanner breathed softly at their feet, like someone who's seen the worst, but not today. "Miss Ellie, do you have kids?" Maisie asked mid-bite. Ellie looked at her. Such a simple question, and yet it caught in her throat. "No. But I once wished for one just like you." Maisie tilted her head. "I'm pretty mischievous, though." "Well, I wasn't exactly an angel either," Ellie said gently, booping her nose, making Maisie giggle. Caleb, who had spent years living in silence and motor oil, sat still watching the two ends of his life's spectrum talk like old friends from another lifetime. As the sun rose higher, Ellie stood and brushed off her jeans. She looked at Caleb, her voice lowering. "Do you know what you've done?" "I just gave her breakfast, fixed a few tires." "No," she said. "You let someone like me sit down without having to play a part." For the first time, Caleb had no reply. Ellie turned to go, but as she reached the car door, she paused. "You know something, that little girl. She has the eyes of someone who's lost more than her years should allow, but still chooses to believe." Caleb watched her leave, and for the first time in years, he was scared of losing something he hadn't even dared to name yet. 3 days after the morning with bear-shaped pastries and laughter amidst grease-stained floors, Ellie came back to the garage, but this time, no donuts, no tea, and no Maisie. Caleb was bent over an old truck replacing an oil filter when she walked in, quiet, composed, and a touch more distant than usual. "My door's making a strange creak," she said, placing her purse on the bench, like that was the only reason she came. Caleb didn't look up immediately. Probably the hinge is dry. Or maybe you just needed a reason to come back. Ellie didn't respond, but she smiled this time without hiding. As Caleb carefully tightened bolts, Ellie wandered through the garage the way she always did. She ran her hand along the edge of the workbench, paused at Maisie's crayon drawing of the red-roofed house, and finally slipped a small navy wallet beneath the bench in a spot only someone familiar would think to leave something behind, a place only someone who's lived with forgotten things would notice. She left quietly, offering a wave over her shoulder. "Next time might not happen," she said. "Seems like the car's almost out of problems." Caleb didn't answer right away, but as the door closed behind her, he murmured, "Yeah, the car might be. People, not so much." It wasn't until he was closing up the shop that he noticed it. Something tucked beneath the bench, barely visible. A small leather wallet, initials EM, stitched faintly in the corner. Inside a few bills. An unfamiliar ID card, nothing matching anything Ellie had left before. No credit cards, no business cards, no photos of family. Only one item folded carefully in thirds, a handwritten note. Caleb opened it. The handwriting was hers. He recognized it immediately. "When you fixed that tire, I thought I was testing you. Now, I'm not sure who's testing who anymore." He stared at the words, like they might say more if he just stayed quiet long enough. The next morning, a soft drizzle misted over the town. Caleb waited until almost noon before calling the number scribbled on her plain card. 3 rings, no answer. He sighed, shrugged on his jacket, slipped the wallet into his pocket, and headed out toward the small bakery Ellie once mentioned. The one where she said she got those bear-shaped buns for Maisie. She wasn't there, but the lady behind the counter remembered her. "Oh, the blonde woman in the cream sweater," the shop owner said. "She used to sit by the window, always ordered animal-shaped pastries. Never ate them, though." "Did she ever say what she did for a living?" Caleb asked hesitantly. The woman frowned in thought. "I heard her on the phone once talking about transfers, trusts, shareholders. She's not from around here, that's for sure." Caleb thanked her quietly and walked away. In his pocket, the small wallet remained untouched, like a secret, waiting to either be opened or buried for good. Later that afternoon, when Caleb returned to the garage, he found Maisie beneath the tarp at the back coloring. She held up a new drawing. "Look, Daddy, this is our new house. Miss Ellie's in it too." In the picture, a blonde woman stood next to a man holding a wrench, and a tiny girl hugged a stubby-legged dog. Caleb stared at it, then looked at his daughter. She draws what she believes is real, he whispered. But him? He wasn't sure. Whether Elena Maddox was a woman, or a dream in a sweater, testing the heart of a man who no longer dared to dream. That night, it rained again. Not the kind of rain that slams against windows like fate pounding at your door, but a steady, quiet rain like background music for those still wandering through their own lives. The garage was closed, the town lights dimmed, only a soft yellow bulb dangled by the porch, flickering like a heartbeat that refused to fade. Caleb sat on an old oil drum hands, cupping his head, planning to end the day with nothing. Until he heard 3 soft knocks on the metal door spaced out. Intentional. He opened it, and there she was. Ellie in a thin coat hair, damp from the rain, holding a large pizza box in her arms. I figured, you might not have eaten yet, she said, her voice low and clipped, but just enough to make a tired heart skip. Caleb didn't ask why she came back. He didn't say come in like some polite script. He just stepped aside just enough to make room for a woman to walk in, and just quiet enough to not disturb whatever fragile thing had returned between them. They sat inside the old truck. Caleb handed her a dry jacket. She slipped off her coat, revealing a slightly wrinkled turtleneck sweater, the faint scent of tea flowers rising from her hair. The pizza sat between them. On Ellie's lap was the same stained rag Caleb used to wipe engine grease, now playing the role of the evening's finest napkin. "What kind of pizza do you like?" she asked. "The kind with extra cheese and half off after 9 p.m. She laughed, her first real laugh in days. Not measured, not guarded. Caleb told stories of when he was a trainee skipping meals to buy a cheap Chinese tool set and how his first wrench broke before it could loosen its first bolt. Ellie shared about a deal she once signed with a typo so bad it lost her $3 million. But what made her cry, she said, wasn't the money it was reading in the next morning's paper that she lacked composure. "A paper once called me a finance doll," she said with a dry smirk. "Wow," Caleb said mid-chew. "If I were a doll, I'd be the factory reject kind. Missing an arm or something." They both laughed. The rain still tapped against the windows, but inside that truck, laughter was the only thing strong enough to chase out the cold leaking through the steel seams. Ellie tilted her head and asked, "Have you ever thought that maybe if you were born somewhere else, life would have been easier?" Caleb looked out the window, then shook his head slowly. "I used to think that. But then I realized, if I wasn't born here, I wouldn't have Maisie. And without her, I wouldn't have had a reason to make it through each day." She fell quiet. "What else?" she whispered. "You," he said, the words spilling out like a breath. "If I wasn't here, I wouldn't have met you." Ellie turned away, blinking. Streetlights shimmered through the wet glass like an old Polaroid caught in time. In that moment, it felt like they had crossed every fence past identity, fear, and doubt. But then, Ellie stood up. "Thanks for the pizza," she said, forcing a smile that tried too hard to hold something in. Caleb didn't stop her, but his eyes, for the first time, didn't look like someone saying goodbye to a guest. They looked like someone losing something he never got the chance to name. Ellie stepped outside. The rain kept falling. She didn't use an umbrella. She didn't run. She walked slowly down the middle of the road, as if every step was a question she wasn't ready to answer. In her coat pocket, the small wallet Caleb had returned every coin untouched still lay quietly. And in her heart, the mechanic who had never once asked her who she really was had just shaken everything she thought she knew about the world. 3 days after that rainy pizza night, the skies finally cleared. But in Caleb's heart, the clouds hadn't quite lifted. That strange sense of emptiness, unfamiliar after years of numbness, lingered like engine grease that clung to skin even after a good scrub. Ellie didn't return. No messages, no explanations. Her white SUV vanished from town as if everything that had happened was just condensation on a windshield there for a moment, gone with the morning sun. Caleb told himself, don't expect anything from someone who never promised. Thursday afternoon. The garage was nearly empty. Caleb was working on a pickup, fingers deep in oil and bolts, when a sleek black sedan glided into the lot. It barely made a sound. The door opened, and out stepped a man in a sharp black suit, black sunglasses and shoes, polished enough to reflect daylight. No smile, no greeting. He simply walked forward. "You, Caleb Rourke." His voice was low, regionless, measured. Caleb gripped the wrench tighter out of instinct. Depends who's asking. The man pulled a beige envelope from his coat and placed it on the bench. A proposal from an organization that could change your life and your daughter's permanently. Caleb didn't open it, just frowned. I'm not interested in being on reality TV. The man didn't blink. We know you're straightforward. We also know you've turned down 3 assistance programs because of pride. But there are some things you can't do alone forever. And why would your people care about me? Because someone already does, the man replied calmly. Someone with influence. A lot of it. Caleb froze. That answer. It sounded like a string connected straight to Ellie. But this wasn't her style. Ellie was subtle, gentle. This man was a messenger from a world that didn't ask, it just moved. Caleb opened the envelope. Inside, an offer to become a technical advisor for a green urban transit initiative in the next city. The pay was 12 times what he made now. It came with housing, a scholarship for Maisie, insurance, stock options, custom terms. Sounds like heaven, Caleb muttered. Or a trap. It's an opportunity, the man said, adjusting his glasses. Of course, only if you're worthy. When the sedan slipped away like a shadow, Caleb remained standing in the sun, still holding the contract, but staring down the road, as if searching for a ghost that had just disappeared around a bend. 1,000 questions surged in his mind. Who's behind this? Why him was Ellie? Just a part of some grand test. That night, Caleb couldn't sleep. He sat by the back of the truck, watching Maisie breathe softly in her sleep, his thoughts tumbling louder than the crickets outside. Everything he believed that kindness was its own reward now felt threatened by something he wasn't ready for. Being noticed. He thought of Ellie, and realized he might not have ever truly known who she was. But somehow, he had come to know who he was because of her. A week passed. The garage still opened every morning. Kids still raced by with their playful shrieks. Broken down trucks still came in with sputtering engines and stayed behind in oil-stained silence. The world hadn't stopped, but one thing had. Ellie Maddox. No more texts, no calls, no familiar white SUV pulling up at the corner unannounced, but always welcome. She vanished from town as swiftly as she had arrived, leaving Caleb with the aching sensation of waking from a dream before you ever reached the ending. Caleb didn't ask anyone, didn't go searching, but those who've ever loved will understand. Not searching is its own quiet form of waiting. Every footstep outside, every car pulling up, every knock on the door set his pulse one beat off rhythm. Every time his phone rang, he looked at the screen before picking up. And every time when it wasn't her, he would just mutter to himself, I had no right to expect anything. One night, Maisie curled into his lap, arms wrapped around his neck, and whispered, Daddy, where did Miss Ellie go? Caleb held her close. I don't know, sweetheart. She said she only leaves if the little girl was being good. And I was good. That one simple sentence was like a needle piercing the most hidden part of Caleb's chest, the part that had feared deep down that maybe Ellie never really meant to stay, that he and Maisie had only ever been a scenic pause in the long, restless journey of a rich woman searching for a story worth telling at high-end dinner parties. That night, Caleb cleaned up the garage. As he wiped the old chalkboard where Maisie often drew, he found one sketch that hadn't dried yet. A girl with blonde hair sat between 2 people, a man holding a wrench and a little girl hugging a stubby-legged dog. Below it, in Maisie's shaky scrawl, now our family has 3 people. Caleb froze, then smiled, soft-pained. Yeah, we did. Once. The next morning, he took the contract left by the man in black, folded it neatly, and locked it away in a drawer. He didn't sign it, didn't call back, didn't burn it either, because sometimes turning down a dream deserves its own quiet ritual. Instead, he returned to what he understood best, changing oil, tightening bolts, scrubbing spark plugs, and listening to the way engines spoke, sometimes rough, sometimes gasping. But if you really listened, they'd tell you exactly what they needed to keep going. Elsewhere in a tower above a city that never really slept, Ellie stood before a wall of glass, watching the river of traffic below. She wore a crisp white blouse. Her hair was tied up, but her eyes were far, far away. Her assistant entered. Ms. Maddox, the Nordic investment call is confirmed. Also, the market analysis report has been forwarded to your desk. She didn't turn around. Cancel it all. Ma'am, I need to go back somewhere, where people look at me and don't know who I am. And Mr. Rourke Ellie's answer was quiet, but firm. He doesn't need a visitor. He needs someone who stays. Back in the garage, Caleb was pinning up an old torn map on the wall. It showed all the towns he'd passed through in his life, places where he'd stopped, repaired something, and left again. But for the first time, he marked a dot, not for where he'd been, but for where he had wanted to stay. That little town, that rusty garage, and the woman with sunlight hair, whom he now wasn't sure was a memory or something still unfolding. That morning began like any other. Caleb woke to the screech of a delivery truck outside the garage. The sun crawled cautiously across the warped tin roof. The smell of old oil lingered in the air like a tired greeting no one asked for. But the strange thing arrived with the rusty mailbox near the door. A cream-colored envelope, no return address. Only his name written in precise cursive, Caleb Rourke, Emersontown. He held it hesitant. Anything too carefully written made him think of Ellie. Inside, a thick, embossed invitation printed on fine stationery. You are cordially invited to attend the Unsung Hero Recognition Evening, Friday 7:00 p.m. at the Armitage Hotel, Langston City, and below handwritten, to the one who patched a tire and restored a little faith. Caleb frowned. The Armitage. That was the biggest hotel in Langston, the kind of place where his boots weren't polished enough to enter. He folded the card, tucked it in his pocket, and went back to his wrench as if it hadn't just stirred something in him. That evening, as he packed up his tools, Maisie ran over waving her sketch pad. Daddy, look. She held up a new drawing, a lit-up room, a stage, 3 people standing side by side, a man, a little girl, and a woman in a long dress with blonde hair. Above them, in her scribbled handwriting, Miss Ellie said, "You'll be the one standing in the light." Caleb froze. You dreamed this? No, Maisie replied matter-of-factly. I just drew what I dreamed last night. Caleb sat still for a long time after that, the invitation in his hand, 100 questions in his heart. He wasn't one for ceremonies. He never wanted to be the center of anything. But, Ellie once told him, sometimes you don't need to be noticed. You just need someone to say your name and get it right. And this was the first time someone had written his name, no spelling mistakes, no assumptions. Friday afternoon. Caleb wore the best shirt he had left, the only one still intact from his wedding day. Pressed old jeans, boots polished until they stopped apologizing for the dirt. He didn't tell anyone where he was going, just left a note for Maisie. Going to find something I should have kept long ago. If I'm late, have dinner first. Love you, Dad. Langston shimmered like another planet. The lights, the voices, the kind of place where conversations didn't rise or fall, they just floated. But as Caleb stepped into the Armitage's golden lobby, he noticed something he didn't expect. Everyone smiled at him. The receptionist knew his name. The usher led him straight to the main hall, no questions asked. When he reached the front row, a young woman handed him a name tag, Caleb Rourke, honored guest. He accepted it awkwardly. The stage lights dimmed. Music began to play. Then a woman's voice echoed from the microphone, warm, clear ringing like a bell dipped in crystal. Sometimes the people who quietly change the world don't even know they're doing it. Caleb looked up. It was Ellie, but not Ellie in a garage. Elena Maddox in an ivory silk gown, stage lights catching the gold in her hair, and her eyes. Those were still hers, the ones he knew better than any engine part. She smiled, softly, like she'd been waiting for this moment a very long time. The entire ballroom was bathed in a warm, amber glow. The music faded, and every eye turned toward the woman standing at center stage. Ellie, or rather Elena Maddox, stood tall. No cue cards, no teleprompter, no boardroom stiffness masking her presence. She stood as herself, and for the first time, she wasn't speaking for directors, shareholders, or headlines. She was speaking for one person, and only one. I'm here tonight, she began, her voice steady and natural, loud enough to reach the farthest row, without effort, not to talk about success, wealth, or market expansion. I'm here, because of a flat tire in the rain, and the man who knelt to fix it, without knowing who I was. A soft murmur passed through the crowd. People began glancing around, curious, wondering who this speech was really about. He never asked my name, never complained, never took a tip. He just tightened the last bolt, gave a quiet nod, and walked away into the rain, carrying the weight of someone who's lost more than a peaceful life. In the front row, Caleb sat, frozen hands gripping the seat. She hadn't said his name yet, but every word coming from her mouth was unmistakably his. Elena Maddox, she continued, is the name many of you know, but I prefer the way he calls me Ellie, because that's the person I wish I could always be when I'm not being defined by power media or expectation. A pause, and then she looked directly at him, not just into the crowd, at him. He's not a hero. He doesn't wear a suit. He has nothing to prove. And that's exactly why. He's the only man I've ever trusted to be my beginning. A spotlight quietly found Caleb. The entire ballroom turned. He didn't rise, didn't wave, didn't flinch. He just sat there in a worn dress shirt, eyes wide, as if someone had just pulled him out of a dream and dropped him into a moment that was painfully real. Mr. Caleb Rourke. Elena said, her voice softening. Tonight, I didn't invite you here to honor you. I invited you to ask you something. Can a heart be repaired the way you once repaired my tire? The room went still. No applause, no whispers, because some moments don't need drama to reach the deepest places. Caleb rose, not with flair, not with hesitation. He just stood because it was the only honest thing left to do, and he walked toward her, eyes never leaving hers. Elena stepped forward. No heavy makeup, no diamonds. Only the gaze of a woman who had stood beside presidents, yet now stood in front of a man with nothing but calloused hands and a silence that understood more than most voices ever could. When they met at center stage, Elena leaned in just enough for only him to hear. I've traveled the world searching for someone I could trust. I never thought I'd find it, in a rusty garage with burnt coffee and an oil rag for a napkin. Caleb replied, just as quietly, I stopped believing in fate a long time ago. Until you turned your car around even after the tire was fixed. She reached for his hand, not to shake it, to hold it, not with power, but with a promise that didn't need words. Caleb took her hand, and the entire room erupted. But to Caleb, the applause didn't matter. Only one thing did the pair of little eyes watching from the balcony above, Maisie beaming wide as she saw her dad finally standing in the spotlight, just like she had drawn him in her dream. After the applause that seemed to stretch on forever, after the handshakes from people whose names Caleb couldn't recall, after the curious stares and respectful nods, they slipped out quietly through the backstage door. Behind the curtain, the lights were softer, the air cooler, and for once, the only sound was the rhythm of two heartbeats, echoing louder than the click of shoes on the polished wood floor. Neither of them spoke, not right away. Elena took off her glittering earrings, tucked them into her bag, and rolled her wrist gently, as if finally freeing herself from a role she'd been playing far too long. Caleb leaned against the wall, eyes unfocused, like he still hadn't fully accepted that he had just stepped out of the life he knew and into one he never dared to believe was possible. Elena Maddox. He said, not a question, not a reprimand, just her name stated aloud. I'm still Ellie. She replied softly, eyes steady. Still the same person you found with a flat tire. I just thought, if you knew who I really was, it would ruin everything. And if you never told me, he said calm and direct, that would have ruined it too. She nodded. I know. And I'm sorry for not believing you were kind enough to treat me that way without needing to know who I was. Caleb gave a faint smile. It wasn't that you didn't believe. You were just scared. Scared of what? That if you really did find something true with someone like me, then maybe everything you built before would start to feel meaningless. Elena didn't deny it. She didn't need to. She stepped closer, and in a voice so soft it almost sounded like memory, she said, you know, every year I'm asked to give speeches, economic forums, leadership summits, charity galas, honors nights, all of them written by PR teams, edited down to the last comma. But tonight was different. Because tonight I didn't talk about strategy. I talked about a mechanic whose every glance, every word, every act taught me something Harvard never did. Caleb looked at her, the last fragments of his emotional armor beginning to dissolve. What did I teach you? he asked. Elena smiled. Not the public kind, the real kind. That sometimes the kindest person in the room doesn't ask who you are, but hands you a cup of coffee and simply says, "Are you cold?" And in that moment, they didn't need any more applause. Or another stage. Just the golden light spilling across the hallway wall, the faint scent of jasmine from the rooftop garden, and the kind of silence that two hearts recognize when they finally beat in sync. Caleb reached into his pocket and pulled out a folded slip of paper, the handwritten note she had left with the wallet weeks ago. He opened it and held it out. "Elena Maddox," he said quietly, "owes me one moment of truth." She took it, flipped it over, and wrote something on the back, then handed it back. "Caleb Rourke owes me one moment of allowing himself to be happy." That night, they didn't leave in a limo. They sat together in Caleb's old pickup truck, rolling through streets where no one recognized them. Maisie dozed off in the back seat, cheeks puffed out around a tangerine candy Elena had slipped her earlier. The wind was soft. Streetlights drifted past like slow-falling stars. And between them, a man who once thought patching tires was all life had left for him, and a woman who once believed she could only love if she stayed in control, were learning together how to let go without being afraid of losing. The next morning, the town of Emerson woke up to a breeze that felt different. Not because the weather had changed, but because something softer, lighter, had quietly settled over everything during the night. No one said anything, but everyone noticed the old pickup truck parked out front looked brighter. And on the garage steps, where usually it was just Caleb and his oil-stained boots, stood a new figure. Elena Maddox, wearing an oversized men's button-up shirt, holding 2 paper cups of coffee. Old Hank, the garage owner, paused mid-step when he passed by. "Well, I thought you were one of them insurance people," he muttered. Elena smiled and extended one of the cups. "No, I'm a regular." Hank squinted at her. Haven't seen Caleb smile like that in a while. Smile like what she asked. Like, he's not bracing for something. Inside the garage, Maisie was busy taping her old drawing back on the wall, the one of the 3-person family she'd drawn weeks ago. But this time, she carefully added something new, a tiny coffee cup in the hand of the woman with the yellow hair. Caleb stood behind her silent. He didn't correct her drawing, didn't adjust the position. He just watched, as if every crayon line had quietly filled a piece of his heart he didn't know was still missing. By mid-morning, no one asked who Ellie was. No one pressed what they were to each other. They simply saw her slicing apples for Maisie, while Caleb changed a transmission belt. The 3 of them spoke in a language that only those who've known loss could understand: silence without awkwardness, closeness without need, presence without demand. Around noon, a line of luxury cars pulled up in front of the garage. A driver stepped out and bowed slightly. "Ms. Maddox, the board is waiting in Langston." Elena turned to Caleb. "I have a meeting." "I know, but I'll be back by evening, and tomorrow morning, if you brew the coffee early enough." She smiled. "I'll be here." Caleb didn't nod, didn't promise. He simply lifted his coffee cup and tapped it lightly against hers, a promise that didn't need confirmation, because they both understood it. She got into the SUV. It rolled away, stirring a bit of dust. But this time, Caleb didn't watch it for long. He turned back into the garage where Maisie was playing with Spanner, the old dog who had now learned to drag his front paws excitedly every time he heard her car approach. Caleb sat beside his daughter. Daddy Maisie whispered, "Is Miss Ellie a fairy?" Caleb shook his head, then winked. "No, she's the one who fixed Daddy's heart. Some love stories don't need vows, no fireworks, no Facebook status updates. Just mornings shared over quiet coffee. A glance that says, 'I know.' A silence so full no one dares break it. They didn't move into a mansion, not because Elena Maddox, who once lived in a penthouse overlooking the Langston Bay, couldn't afford it, but because Caleb Rourke, who once slept in a truck warmed only by his daughter's breath, knew that a home wasn't built with money, but with the small things money could never buy. So they chose a weathered wooden house at the end of Laurel Street, once owned by a pair of retired bricklayers. 2 bedrooms, an old brick kitchen, a shed out back still smelling of fuel. The ceilings were a little low, the windows sagged just a bit, and the floor creaked every time Maisie danced in the living room. But on their first morning there, Elena stepped out onto the porch, coffee in hand, breathed in deep, and smiled. "There's a scent," she said. "Something real." Caleb looked at her screwdriver still in hand. Motor oil and apple pie. She sipped. Sounds like the name of a cafe for people with broken hearts. Elena didn't quit her job. She was still a CEO. But instead of flying 4 times a week, she now worked from this little town. From the garage, actually, which they eventually wired for high-speed internet, just so she could take Zoom meetings while Maisie sat beside her coloring pictures of a house with a garden and pies and 3 people. Caleb still fixed cars, but business picked up. People didn't just come for oil changes anymore, they came for something quieter, something they hadn't realized they were missing: silent kindness. And the story that now traveled quietly through town. Her new boss isn't anyone famous. He's just the guy who patched her tire in the rain and didn't ask for a thing. One day, Caleb brought Maisie to her new school. On the admission form under Guardians, he wrote 2 names: Caleb Rourke, Father Elena Maddox, keeper of reasons to keep going. The teacher looked up puzzled. Caleb just grinned, a bit wordy, but true. Elena started writing a book, not a CEO memoir, not a success story, but a slim little volume titled The Man Who Fixed Faith. She never used his name. She simply wrote, "He had nothing but his rough hands, an oil-stained rag, and a look that made me forget I was running from the entire world." The book was privately printed, but those who read it said it was the only book that ever made them believe in something ordinary that felt unforgettable. One evening, the 3 of them sat on the front steps, watching fireflies blink across the yard. Maisie turned to her dad. "Daddy, if we're rich now, can we stop working?" Caleb answered. "When joy runs out, you can stop. But if happiness keeps showing up, you keep going." Elena tilted her head, smiling. "What if she's happy but still broke?" Caleb chuckled. "Then congratulations. You've just discovered the kind of life the rich can't buy." And so they lived together, no grand labels, no marriage contracts, no lavish receptions, just apple pie, motor oil, and mornings where a single glance between 2 cups of coffee meant more than diamonds ever could. There were no more ceremonies, no end credits. Just another ordinary morning in the quiet town of Emerson, where people recognized each other's faces through the early fog, where old engines coughed to life with familiar rhythm, and where the smell of fresh apple pie snuck through a crack in the kitchen window. Caleb stood inside the garage, sleeves rolled up, sweat glistening across his brow, but his eyes were bright. Elena sat on the front step, hair loosely tied up, a half-read book in her hand, her gaze drifting back to him every now and then, as if she were still writing the final paragraph of a love story that had never needed to be spoken aloud. At the far end of the yard, Maisie was tying a ribbon around Spanner's neck, the old dog now wrapped in a knitted vest handmade by Elena during one of her late Zoom meetings. And in that moment, no one had to say it, but everyone knew they had stopped chasing the big things, to learn how to stay with the little ones that were finally enough. Daddy Maisie called out, her voice ringing clear. "Can I bake today?" Caleb looked over at Elena, then winked. "Ask your mom." Elena looked up, caught off guard for half a breath. Then she laughed, soft and full. "Sure," she said. "But this time, let's go easy on the baking powder, okay?" Maisie squealed and ran toward the kitchen. Spanner followed close behind. Elena rose, brushed off her shirt, and walked slowly toward Caleb. "No early coffee today," she teased. "I was waiting," Caleb said evenly, "for the right person to drink it with." She smiled. "Well then, you waited just right. You see, some love stories don't start with grand proposals, or mountaintop photos, or fireworks. They start with a flat tire, a cup of half-burnt coffee, and a quiet invitation to just sit down. And they last, not because they're loud, but because they're true in the places we're most afraid to show. If you're lying in the dark tonight, hearing the soft whirl of a fan, listening to this story under a sky that might feel heavy, just remember, somewhere out there, someone is still fixing the broken wheels of their own life, slowly, quietly, but with a hope that one day someone will step out of the rain and choose to stay. Good night. And if you dream, may it be of a porch that smells like apple pie and motor oil, where happiness doesn't come from luck, but from all the little things you once thought didn't matter. See you again in another story.